North Korea's population is about to collapse, and this threat is getting serious with every passing day. You may think we're kidding, but take a look at this video of its leader, Kim Jong-un, crying in front of his citizens, begging them to fight for their inevitable future. Aren't you a little bit surprised to see someone who is notoriously known for leading one of the world's most oppressive regimes crying in fear? And a little more curious to know about why this population collapse is happening? To answer the question of what forced the Hermit Kingdom leader to cry, simply put, he was urging all North Korean women to have more children to stop the fall in the birth rate, an issue that has long troubled the country from as early as the 1970s and one day could very well lead to a population collapse. While North Korea's population decline is not a new development, as numerous headlines have highlighted over the years, this marked the first time its leader publicly acknowledged it as a problem. But why is North Korea's population declining? And why is Kim Jong-un so riled up about it? After all, one look at the total population graph of the country, one can easily say that all the North Korean population over the years has only gone up. So how come there's a threat of population decline in the country? We will be covering all this shortly, but before we dig into the what and why, let's take a quick look at the current scenario. And before we get into the main subject, please hit the like button to help us stay in the algorithm. YouTube does not like hard-hitting content, and your likes mean a lot to us in our continued effort to create and deliver such geopolitical topics. Alright, let's get on with the video. While there are several parameters available, the single most important factor in determining population growth is something known as the total fertility rate, or the TFR. The total fertility rate measures the average number of children born to women during their reproductive years. Or, in much simpler terms, it is the number of children each woman will give birth to on average. Currently, North Korea's fertility rate stands at 1.79 births per woman. And as per the observers, this number will only go down in the future. This is a big problem for the country, as it is lower than the birth rate needed to maintain the population. You see, according to the United Nations assessment, the ideal total fertility rate required for any country to maintain its population from decline or any collapse in the future is 2.1 births per woman. This is also called the replacement level fertility, which, as the name suggests, is the level of fertility at which a population exactly replaces itself from one generation to the next. And that's exactly what worries Kim Jong-un, because if this trend of continued decline in fertility rates continues, this could create a huge crisis for the country in the long run. This means that not only North Korea's working age population, that is, the number of people between the ages of 15 and 64, could start to fall in the years leading to 2030, but the country's overall population of 26 million people could also begin to decline from 2034. This issue of growing demographics crisis isn't just North Korea's. Several East Asian countries like China, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan are also facing similar population challenges, though for different reasons. China, for example, had a 2-year consecutive population drop in both 2022 and 2023 due to low birth rates, which is currently sitting at 1.7 births per woman. Due to this, it may lose up to 109 million by 2050, or more alarmingly, its population could shrink by half by the year 2100. Similarly, Japan's fertility rate is 1.2 births per woman, the lowest ever recorded, making the 8th consecutive year of decline. And speaking of decline, how can we forget South Korea with a birth rate of 0.68? To put it into perspective, the condition of the South Korean population decline is so terrifying that its population of 51 million people could halve by the year 2100. Now, when we compare North Korea with a birth rate of 1.7 from these countries, you could say that the situation in North Korea isn't that different, and it even has a higher birth rate than some of them. So why is this threat of population collapse more alarming in North Korea than its neighbors? For that, you need to understand that there's a key difference between the country and its neighbors, as countries like China, Japan, or South Korea, for that matter, are all developed, wealthy, and have stronger economies. These are upper middle income and high income countries, while North Korea is a low income country, and that comes with certain consequences. Let's understand what those consequences are and how North Korea is a bit of a paradox in terms of the falling birth rate. In general, developed countries with high income tend to have a lower fertility rate due to lifestyle choices associated with economic affluence, where mortality rates are low, birth control is easily accessible, and children often can become an economic hardship caused by housing, education costs, and other costs involved in bringing up a child. To cite a few examples, the United States has a fertility rate of 1.7. Russia has 1.4, and the United Kingdom with 1.7, and the list goes on. However, such is not the case with low-income countries, and they typically face a higher fertility rate. Take Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, which is one of the poorest regions in the world and has a fertility rate of 5 births per woman. Now, in 2023, North Korea's gross national income per capita was just about $1,217, making it one of the poorest countries. And yet, unlike any other poor country, it is facing a declining fertility rate seen only in developed countries. And that's where the real threat lies. Besides wealth, the developed countries also have modernized economies and often compensate for the declining workforce with technological advances and automation. Strikingly opposite, North Korea still uses a labor-intensive economic model, meaning its economy relies heavily on people and physical labor rather than technology or automation. Without technological advancements, North Korea cannot balance the shrinking labor force with machines or efficient processes like any developed country would. With little fuel, machinery, or advanced technology, Kim needs a booming population to support the labor-intensive farm and industrial sectors and fill the ranks of one of the world's most militarized states. So, a declining fertility rate and a shrinking working-age population means fewer people will be available to support the economy, leading to potential challenges in maintaining productivity and economic growth. In other words, North Korea is growing old before getting rich. But why is this happening? While the reasons behind this are many, let's start by going back a few decades into the country's history and see how it is responsible for the current population collapse threat. Before the Korean Peninsula was divided, it was under Japanese rule from 1910 to 1945. And during the 1940s, the total population of the peninsula was around 25 million. However, after the defeat of the Japanese and in the aftermath of the Second World War in 1945, the Korean Peninsula was divided into 2 parts. The North was administered by the Soviet Union, and the United States administered the South. North Korea, backed up by the Soviet Union and later China, was a communist state, while South Korea, supported by the United States and other Western allies, was anti-communist and capitalist. Long story short, due to growing tension between the two factions and North Korean leader Kim Il-sung's desire to unify Korea under communist rule by force, a civil war started in the Korean Peninsula in June of 1950, when the Northern forces, equipped and supported by the Soviet Union, launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. The war went on for 3 brutal years and resulted in a significant loss of life, with millions of casualties resulting in changing the demographics of both sides. Now, coming back to North Korea, its population was estimated at 9.3 million at the time of its division in 1945. The country saw almost no population gain through migration across borders from 1945 to 1949, but then lost more than 1 million people during the 1950s Civil War, due to heavy casualties and a large refugee migration to South Korea. However, after the Korean War, the country saw a major surge in population because of the peace and massive post-war rehabilitation period, and the population exponentially rose from 8.4 million in 1953 to 15 million by the 1970s, showing a growth of about 3% per year. However, there was also one major factor that hugely contributed to this growth, and that was the boost in the country's economy. While the country lay in rubble in the aftermath of the 3-year gruesome war, something had to be done to jumpstart the collapsed economy. Influenced by both the Soviet Union and China, who were the key allies of North Korea at the time, Kim Il-sung adopted a similar command or centrally planned economy to achieve rapid economic recovery and development. Under the command economy, which still exists in North Korea to this day, the state controls all means of production, and the government sets priorities and emphasizes in economic development. In other words, the government decides what goods and services to produce, how much to produce, and how to distribute them, hence giving them complete control of the mobilization of resources. Under this policy, they also started to implement a series of economic plans with the primary goal of rebuilding the country's economy, infrastructure, and industrial capacity, which had been severely damaged during the war. These plans were modeled after Soviet-style economic strategies, focusing heavily on heavy industry, agriculture, and energy production. To successfully execute them, the Soviets provided substantial financial aid, technological assistance, and specialists to North Korea. On the other hand, China saw the country as a crucial buffer zone to separate China from South Korea and Japan, who were part of the American sphere of influence. But more importantly, both the Soviets and the Chinese wanted to prevent capitalism from spreading further to the Far East at all costs. Therefore, following the classic rule of the enemy of my enemy, China too helped with the required funds and political support. So, with significant assistance from both its allies, in 1954 the government made an ambitious effort by introducing its first three-year plan. The plan prioritized rebuilding and expanding heavy industries, such as steel, machinery, mining, and chemicals. A significant portion of resources were also allocated to build new industrial facilities and restore damaged factories along with other infrastructure, including railways, roads, bridges, and communication systems to restore basic economic functions. Other key areas like agriculture and energy were also targeted to achieve food self-sufficiency and support industrial growth. By the end of 1956, the collective effort bore results, and the first three-year plan was considered widely successful in North Korea, as it led to the partial recovery of the country's industrial and agricultural sectors. The North Korean government claimed that they not only achieved but also surpassed many of their targets, setting the stage for subsequent economic plans like the 5-year plan in 1957 and the 7-year plan in 1961, which further expanded industrial and agricultural production. Thanks to this relatively strong economy that provided economic stability and adequate state welfare support for families at the time, the fertility rate hit an all-time high at almost 4 births per woman in 1970. Which was the highest ever recorded in North Korea's history. But then, on the economic front, things began to change in the late 1970s. North Korean economic development up until the 70s was notable for its fast rate of industrialization. So, to further fund its industrialization projects and modernization efforts, North Korea had borrowed heavily from Western countries and Japan. These loans were primarily used for purchasing technology and equipment. However, as global interest rates rose and North Korea's exports failed to generate enough revenue, the country struggled to repay its debts, and by the late 1970s, North Korea faced a debt crisis, which severely impacted its economy. Moreover, due to its obsession with industrial development, its agricultural sector also faced chronic underinvestment and inefficiencies, causing low agricultural output, and the problem of food shortages began to surface. It was also during this time that its relations with its main allies, the Soviet Union and China, became a bit strained due to political and ideological differences. Although both countries continued to provide some support, the level of aid and economic assistance declined, further straining North Korea's economy. Coping with the issue of a slowing economy, the government began to encourage only 1 or 2 children per couple. And to boost this policy, birth control and abortions were made widely available to its citizens. This policy bore results, but perhaps not the results the government had expected. From a fertility rate of 2.8 in 1980, North Korea saw an exceptional decline to 1.9 in 2000. And as a result, within 20 years they had to ban abortions and the distribution of contraceptives. Pretty similar to what happened with China's one-child policy, the government started to encourage more births in the country and also started to offer subsidies and other benefits to families with 3 or more children. Apart from the governmental policies, there was also one huge factor responsible for the declining birth rate in the 1990s. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, North Korea not only lost its remaining closest ally, but this also led to a severe economic crisis in the country, as it lost its primary trading partner and a source of aid. Its economy, which was heavily reliant on state-controlled agriculture, was already insufficient and under strain at the time, and the Soviet collapse came as a major blow, because suddenly North Korea had no supply of fuel or fertilizers essential for agriculture. The inevitable happened, and from 1994 to 1998, the country experienced one of the worst famines in human history. Also known as the Arduous March, the 1994 North Korean famine was a severe humanitarian crisis that resulted in significant population decline due to malnutrition and mass starvation. Estimates suggest that the country lost about 12% of its total population, and nearly 3 million people died because of it. This period also marked the first time North Korea's fertility rate dropped below the ideal fertility rate. And to be honest, there has been little to no improvement after that. A flying theory behind this is that perhaps the people born during the famine or just after the famine are less inclined to have children because of the severe burden that comes with it. After all, raising and providing for children is not exactly an easy task when your country is plagued by food shortages, right? While this may be true, there does exist one significant impact of the 1990s famine that is one of the biggest driving factors behind North Korea's rate of fertility declining today. During the extreme food crisis in the 1990s and the famine that followed, North Korea also underwent one radical change in terms of the role of women in its society. More and more Korean women were observed seeking survival through unofficial economic activities amid growing marketization to support their families in place of men who were forced into unpaid labor by the government. When the government welfare system collapsed, women became the sole breadwinner of the family, and naturally having a child meant that they couldn't work and the whole family had to starve. Gradually, as North Korean women adjusted to the double burden of traditional roles and the new job of breadwinner, so did social norms about marriage and family. Fast forward to 25 years later, this particular change can still be seen in the country even after it has partially recovered from the crisis. According to defectors and reports from inside North Korea, young people, particularly women, now delay marriage and prioritize access to wealth rather than to power when looking for a spouse. Like many countries worldwide, North Korea is also experiencing a cultural shift, where younger generations, including women, prioritize careers or personal goals over starting a family, especially given the economic hardships of the country. If you think about it, it does make sense. In a society where the quality of life is low and women are responsible for both earning money and raising children, this growing trend of staying away from marriage or avoiding children reflects nothing but a pragmatic and rational decision made by young North Korean women. But sadly, Kim Jong-un's government believes that the women in the country are targets of ideological reforms. And these anti-marriage and anti-childbirth views are nothing but a corrupt influence of Western capitalist lifestyle. As per their words, in this era, the greatest way for women to serve the party and nation is to marry and have lots of children. However, many unmarried women remain unconvinced and suggest that the childbearing issue will resolve itself if the conditions for raising children improve. When asked by one of the defectors about the government's statement, she argued against it, saying it is ridiculous to blame ideology instead of other factors when women, who face a constant threat of food shortage, don't have basics like washing machines, vacuums, or even hot water, are put solely in charge of childcare on top of having to earn money. Well, there's certainly some truth to that, as North Korea's economic hardship is hardly a secret. We all know that the country has been a poster child for borderline starvation and food crises practically from the time of its creation. It has faced chronic food shortages for decades, which worsen during periods of natural disasters like floods and droughts, and continue to impact agricultural output, leading to recurring food shortages. Malnutrition is yet another common phenomenon in the country and has caused several health issues and higher mortality rates, particularly among children and pregnant women, reducing the overall population growth rate. Another compelling evidence of malnutrition can be seen from the continuous shrinking of the height and weight of children since the 1980s. The headline reads that almost half of North Korea's population is undernourished. According to a study, 1 of every 5 North Korean children suffers from malnutrition. And with the poor quality of the healthcare system available, the situation's really only getting worse. As a socialist state, North Korea, under its constitution, guarantees free healthcare for all. However, the country's provision of medical care faces many challenges due to the lack of resources and international sanctions. Not only is the healthcare system underdeveloped, but it also lacks basic medical supplies, facilities, and trained professionals. As per reports, many citizens do not have access to adequate healthcare, which leads to high mortality rates from malnutrition and other preventable diseases. Furthermore, sanctions imposed by the UN and other countries in response to North Korea's nuclear and missile programs have also deepened the economic crisis. Limited access to international markets and aid has had severe consequences for the country's food supply and healthcare system, further increasing mortality and reducing fertility. North Korea also has a long-standing housing shortage, with some studies suggesting that the country only has enough homes to accommodate about 70 to 80% of its households. Another reason contributing to population decline is North Korea's continued practice of Jong-un, or military-first policy. Given its past history and current hostility, the government has long prioritized military spending over the welfare of its citizens. And this diversion of resources leaves less investment in healthcare, education, and social services that could otherwise support population growth. The regime's authoritarian rule and harsh punishment for dissent have created an atmosphere of fear and control, making people less motivated to bring children into such a hostile environment. While on the topic of a hostile environment, Defection is also yet another factor that can exacerbate the population decline process in North Korea. Over the years, many North Koreans have tried to escape the country due to political repression, economic deprivation, or the hope of a better life elsewhere, mainly in South Korea or China. Although the numbers did significantly decrease during the COVID-19 pandemic as the government tightened border security and severe penalties for those who tried to leave the country, some still managed to escape. Earlier this year, South Korea reported that the number of North Korean defectors nearly tripled in 2023. This continuous outflow of people, especially those of working age and in their prime reproductive years, does impact population growth. Additionally, many defectors are young and skilled, which also leads to something called a brain drain effect in the country. And these individuals take their expertise and skills with them, depriving their home country of valuable human capital. Likewise, immigration or permanent settlement by foreigners is also almost unheard of. North Korea is one of the most radically homogenous nations on Earth, with 99.8% of its population identifying as ethnically Korean, and mixing of blood is generally not something the government approves of. The North Korean government tightens controls on who enters and exits the country, and it heavily monitors all foreign visitors. The government views any prolonged foreign presence as a potential source of espionage or ideological influence that could undermine its control and views it as a threat to its stability. So using immigration as a tool to slow down its population decline is certainly out of the question for this most isolated country in the world. But there are a few things North Korea is actively pursuing to slow down its looming demographic crisis. So far, the country has implemented a pro-natalist policy to encourage higher birth rates among its citizens, and the state media often highlights the benefits of having multiple children, portraying it as a way to strengthen the country. The government promotes large families as a patriotic duty and tries to award multi-child families with several incentives and other benefits. Such benefits include additional rations, childcare services, or other state-supported benefits, though the effectiveness of these incentives is limited due to economic hardship and food shortages. Multi-child families are also provided with school supplies on major anniversaries, while parents of triplets and quadruplets are given food and medicine for free and are allocated homes on a preferential basis. Since 2007, mothers who gave birth to a second child are also said to be provided with additional food for 6 months. Under its fertility promotion policies, pregnant women too receive extra benefits. To promote childbirth, the country has extended its maternity leave up to 240 days, including 60 days before and 180 days after childbirth. The government mandates that pregnant women receive a free medical checkup once a month and once a week when their childbirth is approaching. During this period, mothers receive prenatal and postnatal subsidies equivalent to 3,000 North Korean won. However, if you research deeper, the subsidies of 3,000 won, or $3.33 US, are meaningless, because with the money they can't even buy 2 pounds of rice, which is priced at roughly 6,000 won in the market. Shocking, right? Anyway, while these measures can be seen as positive steps taken by the government, it's important to acknowledge that, given North Korea's track record, there are likely some bad ones too. While abortions have been banned in the country since 1993, and punishments for those who perform illegal abortions and use contraceptive devices were already in place, in October of 2015, the government issued a new directive that, along with abortion, also banned the implantation of birth control devices such as IUDs to further control the falling birth rate. Another step involves punishing doctors who carry out secret abortions. The practice has been banned in the country since 1993, and still, to boost their small government salary, some doctors have secretly installed medical equipment in their homes to perform abortions. They charge around 30,000 won, or about $33 per procedure, which is about the monthly salary of an average worker in North Korea. But those who get caught receive severe punishment and may lead to imprisonment of up to 5 to 10 years. To stop such practices, the government has increased doctor salaries by over 40 times, but many still engage in private medical work to make ends meet. Furthermore, there has been a severe crackdown on vendors, too, who sell smuggled contraceptive pills to the residents of the country, and those found guilty are party to severe punishment or jail. To further prevent population loss, the government has also intensified efforts to prevent defections. Besides tightening border security and increased surveillance, the government has also imposed severe punishment for those caught attempting to flee the country. On top of that, North Korea pressures China to return defectors caught along the border, treating them as criminals upon their return and subjecting them to imprisonment or even much harsher punishment to set an example for others considering escape. But what North Korea fails to realize is that defection, change in women's ideology, or social norms are not the root cause of its population decline. It's the economic condition of the country that is responsible for it. So as long as the government doesn't carry out major reforms to alleviate the economic burden that limits people's willingness to have a larger family, this trend of falling birth rates will go on, and one day lead to a greater population collapse of the country. To no one's surprise, North Korea, being North Korea, is doing just the opposite. Rather than taking a policy-based approach to address the situation that is leading women to avoid marriage and childbirth, the government is handling the problem as an ideological issue. Where the country should embrace reforms, such as cutting inefficient and low-paying government jobs or expanding the private sector, it has instead increasingly cracked down on small businesses and tightened state control to root out capitalist behavior. Moreover, Kim has repeatedly refused to dismantle his nuclear program in return for easing sanctions that would allow his local industries to tap into global supplies for machinery and crucial materials. This likely means a labor-intensive economy will be the norm for a while, and with few younger people entering the workforce year after year, the country would struggle to maintain its already limited industrial and agricultural output. According to the forecast, agriculture, being the most critical sector in North Korea, would perhaps bear the biggest brunt. A labor shortage, in all likeliness, would worsen food insecurity and create a vicious cycle, where malnutrition and starvation would further reduce the population. But there are other implications of a falling birth rate too that should concern the country. A declining birth rate, coupled with an aging population, increases the dependency ratio, meaning fewer working-age individuals would need to support a growing elderly population. Now, with North Korea's economic model not equipped to handle an increasing number of dependents, and with limited resources, the state would face difficulties providing for its elderly citizens. Another implication that worries geopolitical analysts is perhaps to counter the effects of a population crisis, the North Korean government might further tighten its control and resort to some extreme measures. These could involve more severe crackdowns on defectors, harsher punishment for political dissent, and strict regulation on families such as forced marriages. Such measures could lead to further human rights abuses, worsening the existing humanitarian crisis in the country. These same analysts also fear that a collapse in the North Korean population could create major regional instability. Countries like South Korea, China, and Russia may face a surge in refugees, straining their resources and potentially leading to some political and security challenges. South Korea, in particular, would be concerned about the economic and social impact of a sudden influx of North Korean defectors, which could disrupt its economy and social services. A shrinking population may also limit North Korea's foreign policy. North Korea presently makes up for the lack of quality in military power compared to that of South Korea by relying on quantity. At the moment, the North Korean army counts among its ranks nearly 1.3 million active soldiers, or 5% of the population, whereas South Korea boasts 500,000 active soldiers out of a population of 51 million. So with the eventual population decline, the country may face some serious challenges in its ability to maintain the size, quality, and effectiveness of its military. Now, recently we crossed 1 million subscribers. Ever since then, we've been flooded with emails asking us questions and advice about growing a channel on YouTube. Even though we try our best to reply to every single email, sometimes these take up too much time, or they ask the same questions we've answered before. That's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one email bootcamp for completely free. So if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can get your email bootcamp by clicking on the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Okay, now back to the video. Well, we can go on and on about what would happen if the North Korean population collapses, but the biggest threat in the eyes of Kim Jong-un, without a shadow of a doubt, is the concern of losing stability of his family's regime. As history indicates, a population collapse could undermine his government's ability to maintain social control. We all know how the state relies heavily on propaganda and military power, but with a declining and increasingly impoverished population, its grip on power may weaken. Discontent among the population could rise to an unprecedented level, and the Kim family may face challenges maintaining their loyalty base, especially within the military, which is vital for regime stability. This could create a power vacuum in North Korea, leading to internal conflict and military intervention, or perhaps result in the country being absolved by South Korea under complex and potentially hostile conditions. All these are nothing but a stuff of nightmares for Kim Jong-un. That's why the leader of one of the most oppressive regimes in the world can be seen crying and imploring in front of his citizens for a major demographic change. But in all honesty, an authoritarian leader or not, Kim cannot force the people to give birth when they do not want to. There's a saying that the better the demography, the better the country will be. Currently, North Korea is busy in its quest for more and more nuclear arsenal, but there's one thing it needs to understand, and fast. Population is, and will remain, the foundation of a country's economic and military power. And without the right measures to reverse the falling birth rate, we fear that a population collapse in North Korea is nothing but inevitable.